So I'm going to condense some really powerful stuff here as an act of service, really. Um, this card, I'm going to trace this for you, right? I'm going to trace this process because there are certain moments here, and I can tell and I can feel when I'm being led into something um, powerful because I'm here to give it light, right? To honor it, to respect it, to give it dignity, to hold space for the spiritual gravity. Um, I got this card here, the Diamond Stars Lefty Grove, number one in the set. I got that a couple of days ago. I was selling a Jackie Robinson 1953 tops online, right? So I have a 54 that I really love. It's my example. So I was selling the 53 online, and I ran into this guy. We were having a conversation. He was like, "Yeah, the Jackie really means a lot to me. I'd love to get this card." I was like, "Man, that's what it's all about. Like, let's just make sure you get this card." I was going to accept pretty much anything on that, just within reason. And he ended up saying, this is what I have available, right? He was like, "I have like $350," and I was like, we could figure that out. We could do like a payment plan, or whatever. He ended up saying, I actually have a card I could trade you along with the cash, and I was like, that's fine. Let's see what you have. And he showed me this. And I'd been talking with some people about the Diamond Stars set from the 30s. This will be the first card that I have from it, but I was like, yes, wow, awesome. Like, great, like I would love this card. I need to get more into Lefty Grove, right? I need to get more into Diamond Stars. So we ended up working something out. He was very happy. So the card's on the way, and I'm going to get him the Jackie Robinson 53 tops, right? I'm glad to get him this card because it's something that obviously is so important to him. So I'm kind of sitting with this, and I'm like, oh, this is strange. Like, let me look into this a little more. And my whole everything that has been pressing forward, this kind of spiritual aspect of labor or the devotional aspect, all of this that has been pressing forward lately. I'm going to kind of move around here. All of this that has been pressing forward lately has been so clearly around this incoming sense of meaning or power that needs to be expressed. And it's about honoring. The title for this was going to be the Mythic Ascent of Lefty Grove. This is a man who, I'm going to pull up the exact information. Here it is. So I was kind of looking at this as the best example of the industrial modern man, right? The man who rises through this milieu of industrialization, globalization, modernism. And this is Lefty Grove, right? His dad was a coal miner. He was born in Lonaconing, Maryland in 1900. He laid railroad tracks, shoveled coal, labored in the coal fields. And this is it's a mythic ascent. He rises in this small coal mining town. Didn't go to college. There was no organized system. He was throwing rocks and doing sandlot pitching, and was discovered. Right, I think he actually played for one of the oil or coal teams, and he was discovered through this as a laborer. And there was just this, like, he's going to do something here. He's going to do something with this, and he becomes one of the greatest pitchers of all time, and perhaps the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time. I mean, him and Warren Spahn are kind of the two. I was a left-handed pitcher when I played, so there's a sense of resonance there. This is a man who rose from the pure grit of industrial modern reality. the Industrial Revolution, these coal fields, right? So this is my topic, and I've kind of been circling that. It's been ongoing in my work. As you can see, right, all of these essays and these writings and these talks, a lot of them had more clarity than this one, but I know I have to be here for this in a way that it's unfolding now. I was talking about the Rust Belt architecture. I'm looking at the Diamond Stars cards as works of art. I'm looking at the World Series tickets. These are all communal phenomena. And these are communal phenomena from a desperate and hard time in American history. This was a time where many people had very little, right? People like Lefty Grove or Satchel Paige grew up with nothing. Dizzy Dean and Satchel Paige's famous friendship. There are men from this age who rise through baseball. There's a mythic ascent. There's something that happens there. Lefty Grove would have lived and died in the coal mines, just the same as Mickey Mantle would have lived and died in the mines. Baseball in this way is an opportunity. It's a stage. It's a possibility where there otherwise was none. I'm just imagining, right, what it's like for someone like Lefty Grove to grow up in Lonaconing, right? This is a very small mining town in Maryland, in the Appalachian. This is just as country and rural as it gets in the United States. So much of the Appalachian and so much of the Rust Belt was this mining, these factory towns further up north to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit. You're looking at a sooty, gridded modernity, right? And in the South, obviously, problems with extreme Jim Crow era segregation and racial violence, and much of the remaining plantation attitudes that continued in the farming in the South to try to maintain some form of economic prosperity. This is pre-technologization. This is America's 20th century industrialization. I would call technologization America's 21st century industrialization. This is the real power behind baseball, behind the meaning of baseball. That you have players like Lefty Grove or Ed Walsh or Satchel Paige or Honus Wagner. Honus Wagner's another great example. Coal miners, factory workers, right? His father was a coal miner and Honus worked in the factories. These are deeply humble, embodied. Lefty Grove, a fiery pitcher. These are people who were and are incredibly grounded in the world and come from circumstances that many people in today's America can barely comprehend. What we witness with a card like Diamond Stars, which I think is really interesting, as well as Gowdy, and as well as 1930s World Series tickets. I could actually pull up an example of that. What you're looking at here is devotional art. What you're looking at here, and I'm just going to switch it back to the Lefty Grove. What you're looking at here is something sanctified, something deeply spiritual. And the cards themselves, right, this is why I'm such a fan of a well-worn baseball card, a card that looks like the time that has passed through it, is that you're looking at a time, a period in American and human history where communities were born out of necessity, and the thing that held communities together was baseball. What held communities together was mutual survival, right? So you have even just the architecture of these towns. I alluded to this, the Rust Belt towns and the Appalachian towns. You can still see it today in these abandoned towns. It's deeply devotional, caretaking architecture. And the reason for that is because these were communities where people leaned on each other, and the work that they did in the community impacted the community directly. These were people who were living and working in factory towns using scrip, right? Scrip was just, you would use, that was like the money that the factory would give you, or the mine would give you, to purchase things from the mine stores or the factory stores in the town. So it was an entire ecosystem based around the factory or the mine. You have to think about that and come to grips with that kind of reality, and then the epic stage of baseball in the midst of Depression era, Dust Bowl era America. So I've focused previously. I did a little on the 50s. I did a little on the early 1900s. I went earlier in the 1800s, late 1800s for the Cuban leagues. But here we really are at the late 20s and early 30s. We're looking at a period of radical economic and political instability between two world wars, where America's financial economic systems and markets were crashing, right? There's this huge turn of events. It's kind of part of the larger global instability at the time. But you look at the ecosystems through which someone like Lefty Grove rose. It's very difficult. I was kind of thinking about this and talking through it with ChatGPT, just kind of like thinking about, like, is there more of an emblematic mythic ascent here? I mean, again, I just want to reiterate: born in a coal town, worked the railroad, shoveled coal. Late discovered, right? Discovered very late. Didn't go to college. Was literally pulled from these labor fields, right? He was throwing rocks and playing in sandlots and like on oil teams or coal teams. And at the back of this card says he has a fastball like Walter Johnson, the greatest fastball since Walter Johnson. This was a guy who burned through his career, right? There was just absolutely extraordinary heights that he reached. I mean, really just the 30s for the most part was his utmost power, right? The end of the 20s into the 30s, and then the very beginning of the 40s. Pretty short career compared to a lot of Hall of Fame pitchers who pitched for like sometimes 25 years, 20 years. But you look at what he was able to achieve in terms of cementing himself, right? His last win was his 300th win. And I actually have a really nice photo of that, a Type 1 photo of that win. You look at what he was able to achieve, and you start to see the stories, right? The extent and the power of the stories that are present here, right? I brought up Ed Walsh before. I brought up Stan Kovaleski. We've talked about Jackie Robinson, where that's more mid-century, and there's a different, right? At the end of the day, there are racialized narratives that are occurring here, right? The things that Satchel Paige and Jackie Robinson are working with are similar to, but different than Lefty Grove or Ed Walsh. And the reason that I'm kind of focusing in on these, I guess the best way to put it is the white major leaguers in the coal mines or in the factories. This is a very specifically kind of northern industrial Rust Belt Appalachian context. Because you're looking at the way in which America transforms at the beginning and towards the middle of the 20th century through different ecosystems. The South and the Midwest being farming, right? You have Dizzy Dean, or you have who else would I bring up? Walter Johnson, who are from these farming backgrounds. Charlie Gehringer is another good one, born on a farm. You have a lot of these players who are from the South and the Midwest who were born into farming lifestyles, right? And they say they were built on the farms, right, through the hard labor on the farms. But there's something so specifically modern about these players who, most of them I would say were born in 1900 or a little later or a little earlier, who in the case of Honus Wagner would be a little earlier, right? Were born in factory and mining towns in the Appalachian, in the Rust Belt, into these towns where you can still see now the entire architecture. These were bustling industrial towns where there was a lot of coal traffic, where there was a lot of mine traffic, where there was a lot of factory distribution and production. Because what these towns are is they are America's history of modernity. The farming towns or farming regions of America, which would conventionally be the South and the Midwest. Not to say that there weren't mines and factories there, right? Especially in Detroit, and in Mickey Mantle's case, right down south, I believe, in Arkansas. It's not to say that those were not there, right? But you're really looking at this northeast corridor, and I've spent a lot of time traveling that corridor, whether it's on road trips or to visit people, etc. So I have a pretty solid understanding of what it's like now. These were the kind of glorious epicenters of America's North, right? America's Northeast. That they're gone now, and if they're not gone, they're rapidly dying because what was there has gone, right? What was there has left. People don't want to work in the mines anymore. The mining and factory work has become less and less of an American institution and more of an exported, internationalized process, right? And so I went deep into that in the financial nihilism episode. So we're tying this all together here. And the reason why I come back to someone like Lefty Grove, or Ed Walsh, or Stan Kowaleski, is that these are players who were forged. They were forged in the iron, right? They were forged in the fire of these proto-industrial towns where, I mean, Lefty Grove is just such a good example because he's playing with rocks. He's pitching with rocks, and that's how he's learning how to pitch. It's similar with Dizzy Dean and his brother Daffy. I think they were using some sort of like, it was like a nut or an acorn, and that's how they taught themselves how to pitch. You have to look at this through a sort of beautifully mythic lens, because when you look at Lefty Grove and all that Lefty Grove is and has done and his legacy in the sport of baseball, you're looking at nothing less than a mythic ascent. A mythic ascent, effectively out of hell. I mean, I think he told his dad, he was like, I'm not doing this. He was like, I'm not working in these coal mines. He said, I think he said, I didn't put that coal there, and I have no intention of like continuing to dig it out, right? I brought up the Kowaleski and Walsh quotes about there was no option, right? They would play baseball, or they would live and die in the mines. This to me is the real underpinning of the sport of baseball. So you have Lefty Grove on the field, and obviously his achievements are almost bar none for what, in terms of the greatest pitchers of all time. Lefty Grove is always in the conversation, right? So you look at those achievements, and that's one aspect of it. But I would argue the much deeper aspect is the real origin story, the real human spiritual aspect of what happens here. He's pulled from throwing rocks and playing on sandlots to, I believe, a minor league contract with Baltimore. With actually the person who found him is the same guy who discovered Babe Ruth, interestingly enough, right? Babe Ruth was in a foster home in Baltimore, and was playing with teams in the Baltimore area. He joins this team, right? And then he, I think it becomes Connie Mack buys him I'm just pulling this off the top of my head. Connie Mack buys him for, I believe, one of the biggest salaries at the time after that. And he goes on to have one of the most successful careers in baseball history. You look at something like this and how it occurs, and it's almost archetypal, but this is history. This is a true story. This is the story of a man who grew up in coal mines in a small town in effectively the middle of nowhere in America, and learned how to pitch from throwing rocks, and then became one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. Didn't go to college, nothing, right? Was discovered offhand by Baltimore. I think it was International League administrative executive member, and becomes a member of their team, and very quickly moves on to Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletics. So I brought up the ticket, and I bring up the card. I'm just looking at my notes here for a second. And I brought up the Rust Belt architecture, this idea of the devotional, collective, communal, mythic craft of baseball. The reason why you have this, I think, in a lot of ways, is because it's necessary. And the necessity of the myth of baseball is the possibility of there really being something more. And I think that's something that in a contemporary sense we've lost, because we've moved into a simulation of reality through technology. So the something more is something more that you find through a screen, through an illusion, through an image. And I think during this period of time in American history, the something more was baseball. And it was very real. And it was happening communally. I brought up the 1910 Tip Top Bread baseball cards previously, released in Pittsburgh to commemorate the 1909 World Series champion Pittsburgh Pirates. This, to me, is one of the best examples of what baseball was. It was a regional collective endeavor. It was a local collective endeavor. It was a way that people in cities and in towns felt deeply connected to one another and to these teams. This was like a center of gravity. It was the community center, so to speak. So you would go watch the Philadelphia Athletics play at Shibe Park, or you go see the Pirates at Forbes Field. And these teams really were representative, just as much as maybe the bread company was representative, or the factory that you worked for was representative, or the tailor in your neighborhood, or so on and so forth, or the butcher. These were real networks that were immediate and they were local, that made a deep impact on the collective consciousness, regionally, locally, and nationally. And baseball was the grid, right? Baseball was the network that connected the entire eastern seaboard, northeastern seaboard at least, right? The furthest west that there was St. Louis at this time in terms of baseball teams. It connected this modernizing corridor of America. And each team was essentially a local or regional node through which the laborers, the iron workers, the farmers would gather and support these teams as effectively community centers. Right? I pulled up the World Series ticket again because I think this is really important. Everything that went on, whether it was the tickets, whether it was the cards, whether it was the architecture, all of this was a devotional, community-centered effort. It was a focus that was happening locally in a communal way to cultivating successful group circumstances. So
when you look at these kind of early baseball cards, and I think I'd specifically gesture to Diamond Stars and Gaudy, um, you're really looking at sacred art. You're looking at sort of Byzantine iconography almost. You're looking at something with that amount of care and that amount of attention because baseball was that important. So it becomes kind of at the deepest level in substratum, going back to the mythic ascent of Lefty Grove, or this idea of the 1930s Rust Belt architecture, just as much as the card or the ticket. It becomes this idea that we are really gathered together here in this place of worship, technically, so to speak. And the place of worship being the community, and the center of community being baseball. This is just how important baseball was, right? In the sense that like the center of a community at the time would also be a church or something like that, something denominational, just as much as a baseball team would be denominational. You're looking at the sacred architecture, which is the cultural backbone of any given sort of regional tribe or locale within the burgeoning, expanding, developing, industrializing United States. And so then you have someone like Lefty Grove, again, such a great example of this, who rises out of the underbelly, right? The literal coal mining underbelly, the underbelly of the mines. This is why Mantle was so important in that last episode. Rises out of that from nothing. No college. He's throwing rocks. He's not even playing on an organized team. He's throwing rocks. He ends up playing on sandlot teams and things like that, or semi-organized teams. But he goes from there to becoming one of the greatest baseball pitchers of all time. This is just something that is very different than the modern time. Only in this time would something like that happen in America. And I think in large part it happens because there's so much chaos and disorganization and change and shift that's occurring. That someone like Lefty Grove, right? He doesn't have any of the benefits, none of the resources. None of the training, none of the education. I mean, nothing. He's making this entirely on his own terms, and he realizes his talent and his skill on the national stage without really any help. I mean, the people find him and discover him and help him hone his skills, but this is later on. He becomes a pitcher and sort of molds himself out of this raw primordial cast of his nature. It's incredibly inspiring. Right? This is the mythic thread in the fabric that's woven through baseball, and perhaps in many ways is deepest with Lefty Grove. I brought up Dizzy Dean and Daffy Dean, Paul Dean before. I brought them up, but there's something still proto-industrial, agrarian about that. Right? They are still on the homestead. They're still on the farm. Lefty Grove is emerging through the industrial grit of rapidly shifting and scaling America. I mean, this is what America becomes. And the first real signs of it are these factory towns and these mining towns. It rapidly spreads and hyper-technologizes, skyscrapers, into computing, etc. Right? So he's really one of the first sons of industrial America. And it's quite fitting to see him rise in this early modern baseball setting to the place that he does and the way that he does it. It's a very specific figure in American history. And I think what's necessary here is a reclamation of the real legend and the real power of the legend, the real underpinnings. Because people will look at, say, the statistics or this, that, and the third when it comes to these players or this era of baseball or these teams. But when you look at someone like Lefty Grove and what Dizzy Dean, who and what they really are and what they really symbolize is the possibility of industrial and agricultural America becoming something mythic legendary, great, important, powerful, right? They function as cultural meta symbols. They function themselves in the heroic mode. Dizzy Dean and Lefty Grove, perhaps the two really great examples there, or even Walter Johnson, of the ability to rise up out of maybe very humble circumstances. In the case of Dizzy Dean and Paul Dean, very humble and impoverished circumstances. Their parents were sharecroppers. Or desperate situations, such as Lefty Grove in the coal mines. These are two different mythic modes, right? Dean becomes a sort of icon of the American South, the American Midwest, for what he accomplishes in the early 30s with the Cardinals and the Gas House Gang. But I want to say this level of mythic power that's at hand with Lefty Grove, or even perhaps a player like Ed Walsh, who also is from the coal mines, right? This is, when you think about sort of heroism incarnate, right, and what it entails is that you have this person who comes from, in Lefty Grove's case, comes from very, very little. He's not afforded education or resources or anything. When he stands on the baseball field, he stands for, toward, and with this entire community of people. These extremely poor factory workers, these extremely poor miners, right? This is someone who actually emerges from those circumstances and rises to the greatest heights possible in a civilizational context. And just how much power is present with that. I just think it's important to sit with that because it is very important. This is just no ordinary person with a middle-class upbringing who went to school and then went to college and became a good baseball player. This is someone who came up out of the American cultural laboring underbelly of civilization and rose to its heights. Right? And so that's the meaning behind baseball, and that's the meaning behind someone like Lefty Grove. It's not stats. It's the story. It's the real human substance and soul. That when he stands on that mound, he stands in front of his people, right? I think the idea was in his Saber bio that he always felt most comfortable among his people, and by his people they meant rural people, right? People who were living and working in this mining context in these small coal towns. So this is the real importance, right? I think it's just really important to see through all of the gloss and all of the historical trappings of baseball, and all you could get lost in the numbers and how great someone was on the field, and obviously that's a huge part of Lefty Grove's legacy. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we want to get into what really happened, who Lefty Grove really is, and what his trajectory and journey really is and represents at a metaphysical, almost spiritual level, that's really when we start to look at the power of baseball, not just in terms of what's possible for an individual, but how that informs the entire collective. So I brought up Hercules, or I brought up Achilles, or I brought up Perseus in the last episode with Mickey Mantle. I'm going to bring it up here at a deeper level because these are the figures who rise in American culture and civilization, at least at the tail end of the 19th century and well into the 20th. Ending with Mickey Mantle, right? Mickey Mantle as my bookend, so to speak. And you have multiple different ways this occurs, right? I brought up Jackie Robinson. I brought up Satchel Paige. Rube Foster is a huge one. We've gone into Rube Foster. And then I'm going to say Walter Johnson, Dizzy Dean, of course. Charlie Gehringer is a really good one. But Lefty Grove, for me, really does hit some bedrock here. in terms of the entirety of his story. So I think I've painted this pretty well here in terms of the devotional aspect and quality. Baseball is sort of created as a cathartic myth engine, operating at the center of American culture and civilization. And it becomes its most powerful, I think, in and by no coincidence, during the most difficult times in early modern American history. 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. Right? Because this is through industrialization, through these coal mining towns, through this rapid factory mass production scaling of the real land and political territory of America, as well as World War I and World War II. You are living in such a destabilized, uncertain, constantly shifting, difficult period of time, not only in American history, but in human history. And how baseball acts is through someone like Lefty Grove, it becomes perhaps its most coherent. And I brought up Babe Ruth coming up in a foster home, which of course is along these very same lines, but I think it's good to just stick with Lefty Grove here. It becomes its most coherent because Lefty Grove is one of the people in the truest sense of the word. This is not some man standing up on a podium who has anything or is gesturing to any sort of power or thing that he got that tells people that he's this or he's that. This is a man who was born and raised with nothing, who lived and would have died in a coal mining town in the Appalachian, but cultivated this skill by throwing rocks, whether or not there was some sort of consciousness there of what that would lead to. Maybe he just enjoyed baseball. I'm assuming that's what the case was. And he was discovered playing on sandlot teams, and then becomes this, right? One of the greatest pitchers of all time. It's cemented in the Baseball Hall of Fame for the eternity that culture establishes. Do you see the cathartic power of something like that? This isn't a theater. We're not sitting in a Greek theater and we're not hearing about stories with characters. This isn't like a puppet show and it's not an art. This is real. This is real history that's unfolding. And it provides, in a civilizational sense, an entire culture of coal miners or factory workers or poor sharecroppers in the case of Dizzy Dean or Walter Johnson. It provides you with something powerful. And this is what heroism is. It provides you with something powerful that reminds you simultaneously that you are human and that through your humanity you can accomplish great things. Right? And so this is as good as it gets. Because it provides people with an entire other layer. It's like a transcendental layer to the fabric of reality. It's the possibility of striving, which again, I brought up the Greek arete, right? It's the striving for excellence or striving for virtue. And this is what the mythic ascent of Lefty Grove really is and can avail us of, and it avails American civilization of. He might be the most powerful mythic figure in baseball because of this. Just the entire fabric of his story. This is unrecognized and uncelebrated. Right? He's mostly just known for being a legendary pitcher. But if you look at the whole story and you see the power of that story at this specific time in American history, this is the most chaotic, destabilized, between two world wars. The economy has crashed, right? It's absolutely, I mean, people can't afford food. They can't afford anything. And you have Lefty Grove, the son of a coal miner, having some of the greatest seasons in baseball history consecutively. Undoubtedly the best pitcher of his time, right? Carl Hubble comes close, but I mean, you look at what Lefty Grove does, it's just excellence. It's excellence. But again, compared to Walter Johnson, that's the direct comparison they make on the back of the card with his fastball. This is a guy who's taking center stage in baseball's cultural pastime. It's mythic drama. And I would argue really that you need people like this. And so it's this sort of deep spiritual synchronicity that's incredibly powerful that he is on center stage at this period of time in history. I mean, this is a guy who's mowing down the best hitters in baseball: Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, um, yeah, you name it. So when these players stand on that stage, again, whether it's Babe Ruth, whether it's Lou Gehrig, whether it's Lefty Grove, whether it's Dizzy Dean, this is not some sort of separated celebrity culture of idolatry or riches. These are real people, and there is a real cultural understanding of where these people came from and who they are. Right? You're watching a member of your community on this cultural stage perform these feats of excellence, these feats of greatness, of legendary athletic ascent or power, technical acuity. It's a real-time art form, real-time cultural art form that allows for the transcendental to emerge in a cultural collective sense. That allowance is the creation of civilization, and it is the creation of a real society or a real culture or a real community. Because what previously held civilizations together, or what you could say on another level holds America together, is a sort of common religious sense, whether that's Protestant or Catholic or whatever you want to call it. Right? There's these pockets of church-going people, and they gather around the pastor summoning the transcendental, whether that's through a Bible story or whatever you want to call it, right? But when you get onto that baseball field, there's a realization of the transcendental realm. You see what I'm saying? The fact that Lefty Grove can be some kid who's throwing rocks, like coal rocks, probably. I mean, in a coal mining town in the Appalachian, and then become one of the greatest pitchers in the most important sport, the most important cultural event in America, in the middle of the Great Depression. That's the realization of the heroic. It's the realization of the God realm. It's the realization of heaven on earth. You see, it's like a seeding. It's seeded, and it's seeding down into the real world. It's like baseball is the fulfillment of the religious, spiritual sense in America, in a cultural, philosophical, civilizational sense. It's a communal, cathartic realization of the transcendental human powers within humanity. Again, these are not, Lefty Grove did not have anything that anyone could have possibly had, right? He didn't have resources, he didn't have an education, he wasn't trained to do this. But through him, these great powers were realized. And there is a difference there. There is a difference there, because it provides these people, right, whether it's the coal miners or the factory workers, with the knowledge and the awareness that he is one of us in the truest sense, right? He too can emerge from the most humble, the most desperate circumstances and fulfill something sacred. He can fulfill not only a sacred cultural or civilizational role, but that he can rise spiritually through trial to achieve a level of personal spiritual greatness. And they're witnessing that, right? It's the witnessing of that person's accomplishment or achievement. And this isn't he made money off of a scheme, or he had a company. This isn't J.P. Morgan. It's not Henry Ford. Those are people and cultural instances that live and die very quickly. You bring up Lefty Grove or Walter Johnson, even to people who don't know very much about baseball in modern day America. Walter Johnson, that's a name that will be understood, as well as Jackie Robinson. Because the function here, and it's not about memory, so I want to clear that out. I want to get back to the root. The function here is the revelation. The revelation of being through trial, which again, I brought up Christ in the last episode, and I'll bring up Christ again. Do you see this path that I'm elucidating? It's a spiritual path of trial, the cultivation of the self and of the soul. through which transcendental achievement is realized, not only for the individual, but for the collective, right? Lefty Grove stands there, the son of a coal miner, amongst his people, right? And becomes one of the greatest pitchers of all time. And that's why this baseball history and baseball is such a sacred form. Because it stands for, you have Lefty Grove, Dizzy Dean, Satchel Paige. These people are not just individuals. They exist in ecosystems of people who struggle through incredible difficulty. Rube Foster, whose parents were enslaved. Right. This is the man that founds the Negro Leagues and teaches Christy Mathewson the screwball. He's easily one of the greatest pitchers of all time. One of the greatest managers as well for the Chicago American Giants. It's a cultural fulfillment. They are standing among an entire civilization and an entire culture in the midst of trial, in the midst of strife, in the midst of incredible, deep, and great difficulty. And they perform the mythic function on the cultural stage. They perform the mythic transcendental function on the cultural stage, and for themselves achieve immortality, a level of immortality in a deep, deep, deep spiritual sense, because it is the striving through which one ascends, right? One becomes spiritually ascended. It's through that striving, but it is also serving a dual function as a communal striving. These people are striving with and through Lefty Grove, pitch by pitch, game by game, because it's us, right? Lefty Grove is a spiritual, cultural representation of us. He is the coal miners. He stands here for the coal miners. He stands here for his people. And just the power in that. This is no mere game, right? This is what I'm trying to say here, and I'm saying about baseball over and over and over again. I'm saying this is no mere game. This is serving a deep, deep, deep spiritual function. Not only for the individuals like Lefty Grove who rise through baseball, but for the entire cultural collective, for the entire spirit and soul of America that is going through this deeply transformative period of time in its history. And through baseball, it sees itself. It realizes itself. It acquires itself. And it wouldn't happen without someone with the total depth of character and the total depth of story and the total depth of history that Lefty Grove has. So when you look at a baseball card of Lefty Grove, like this Diamond Stars card, it's incredibly beautiful, right? It's a devotional piece of art. But at the same time, it contains that. It contains that myth. It's holding and preserving and carrying forth that myth. Because it was there, and it was telling that story then, and it's still telling that story now. So that's what I have. I hope you enjoy this one. Catch you on the next one.